Hello, I'm Dr. Russell Libby, and I welcome you to the world of medicine. Most of us go through this life with our feet firmly planted in the moment. Sure, we keep an eye out for the future. We might plan for our retirement, put away some money, plan for the kids' college education, plan some interesting vacations. We even make plans to go to the mall on the weekend, to the grocery store in the afternoon, whatever it might be. But as we're just players on the game board of life, there's a fickle spinner of fate waiting for someone. And that spinner, when it lands on you, could create a traumatic, horrific episode in your life that changes you forever. It could be an accident on the Beltway. It could be falling off a ladder while you're cleaning the gutters at your house. It could be getting pinged in the head by a golf ball on the 14th fairway. Whatever it is, at that point, you are then relying on an emergency transport and trauma system to take care of you. We're going to learn about what happens to people, how they endure such kinds of episodes. We're going to talk to people about how we respond in the medical setting. We have with us some of the finest experts in emergency transport and emergency medical care from the police department, from the fire and rescue department. We have a trauma surgeon, Dr. Ann Rizzo, from our fine regional trauma center here at INOVA Fairfax Hospital. It's an incredible system and an incredibly coordinated effort that goes and takes place. We have a car that I would love to see a picture of, and it's a red car that we had planned to have as a picture, but there it is. And I'm asking you, do you recognize, there it is, that car?
I do.
You do?
I do.
Okay, well that's what we were hoping you would recognize it.
It used to look better than it does.
It did look better,
yeah.
So that was a car that you once had to be removed from.
Yes, it was.
Let's go back a little bit in that day. Started off like any other ordinary day.
It did. It was July the 20th, 2004. And I had just gotten back from vacation 2 days prior. Was on my way to work down a very nice, calm, serene country road, a scenic byway. And it has some curves along the way. And when I approached a curve, I saw a car coming around the curve in my direction in my lane. And we had a head-on collision, and that's why the car looks like it does.
Well, and you were going about how fast at that time?
We were each going about 50 miles an hour, so it was a 100-mile-an-hour impact.
And I'm sure in your life there had been dozens of times where you found yourself in the wrong lane, but it just had never been in the wrong time.
Don't know about dozens, but...
Well, at least a few anyway. Most of us have had that experience,
right.
and we're aware
right.
that it is that spinner that lands on us.
Right.
And then at that point, you ended up unconscious?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I knew I was going to get hit.
Right.
I had time to slow down immensely, and I had time to look around to see if there was a way to get out of the way, and there wasn't. I knew I was going to get hit. I hollered out to the Lord, and I don't remember much after that. I don't remember the impact, the crash, the sounds, anything, until, I don't know, not too much longer when the fire and rescue guys were there and started talking to me.
And then you ended up at INOVA Fairfax?
Yes, I had my first helicopter ride.
Your first helicopter
But I don't remember
ride.
much of it.
Well, hopefully you won't be riding in the same kind of helicopter ever again.
Correct.
But you ended up at the hospital, and I know we do have a picture of the rescue helicopters that we can show. It's a pretty remarkable scene, and we have one of our rescue helicopter pilots. Or are you a pilot, sir? You're one of...
I'm a paramedic.
You're a paramedic.
Police.
So you go in the air transports.
Correct.
And how many times a week will you go out on a transport?
We average in Fairfax County, I can talk for, about 250 to 300 medevacs a year, and we do all scene medevacs, which could be from the car accident to the electrocutions to the burns, the falls, shootings, stabbings. You name it, we do it.
So you're a pretty important part of that trauma team. Dr. Rizzo, tell us a little bit about a trauma center. What's a trauma center, and how do you categorize them? How does INOVA stand up as a trauma center?
At INOVA Fairfax Hospital, we have a level 1 trauma center, which is the highest level that you can achieve. You can go all the way down to level 4. Level 1 means that you're a 24/7 operation. You have all of the subspecialties that are needed: neurosurgery, orthopedics, ENT, anesthesia, always on call. And you have a trauma surgeon in-house 24/7. There is an additional designation. The state of Virginia designates trauma centers as well, and we are also a level 1 trauma center in the eyes of the state of Virginia. We are the only level 1 trauma center. We are the only trauma center in Northern Virginia right now. The closest ones next to us are down in Richmond and then across into D.C. So we actually cover quite a very large area.
Right. Yeah, and in fact, INOVA's trauma center's been the only trauma center for quite a number of years until the Richmond Center was, I guess, developed just a few years ago.
Correct, correct.
And in that capacity, when you hear of something, you hear about it, do you hear from the helicopter? I mean, tell us a little bit about transport. I know that when people end up at an emergency room, after calling 911, they get transported by an ambulance, but to the closest emergency room on the route?
Well, actually, in the trauma system, the ambulances as well as the helicopters have a triage of where to take the patients. If the patients are critically injured and need the level 1 trauma center resources, then they do come to us. If it's a lesser injury, they can go to the closest available. And what generally happens is either the ambulance, the first responders, or the helicopter will call our communication center and say, this is what we have. This is where we are. This is how far away we are. And then they patch those calls in through to me or the other trauma surgeons on call. And we set up what's called a trauma response. We have 2 levels of trauma response. We have a code yellow trauma response, which is the lower level. It's for patients that are injured, have been in car crashes, but are generally awake and talking and don't have abnormalities in their vital signs. The code blue are the really sick people. They're the people that may have already be on life support as placed on by the helicopter crew or the first responders. They may be very unstable. They may be bleeding to death. They're usually unconscious or in a coma, and we round up lots of resources for those people. Generally responding to the codes are anesthesia, the nursing staff, of course, respiratory, the lab, the blood bank. So there's a great crew of people that pitch in together and all work together to help take care of the trauma patient.
So the hospital itself, really, the emergency room is still the site where this initially all takes place, that whole
Correct.
triage takes place. So
Correct.
when people go to the emergency room and find out that they have a 2-hour wait, it might be for a very good reason.
It might be my fault, and I apologize in advance. But in the emergency room, we generally use the concept of triage, which is the sickest people go first, as based on the French system from Napoleon Bonaparte. And I'm sorry, the sick and dying and bleeding, they go first.
So we saw the red car, and at that point, you were in the car for about how long before anyone came to rescue you? Any idea?
No idea.
So it could have been minutes, it could have been, couldn't have been hours.
Couldn't have been hours, no.
The person in the other car, did they survive?
They did.
And they required some rescue intervention as well?
They did.
Yeah. And you were there?
Yeah, we were the first people there off the fire truck.
Off the fire truck. So how does the information come to you? A passerby may call and say there's been a terrible accident?
Somebody called our 911 center from a cellular phone indicating the accident and where it was. From that point, communications dispatched us, and we were actually a little bit further away from the first due company because they were already on another accident, but we were on the scene within 6 minutes.
On the scene within 6 minutes. That's pretty impressive. Tell us a little bit about what it looked like when you got there.
We got there, we had 2 vehicles that had hit pretty much head-on, had victims in both vehicles, and we had multiple other vehicles that were scattered around in the ditches. First thing I had to do is determine how many people were hurt, how bad they were hurt, and who needed to get out of the vehicles the quickest. Right behind me was my ambulance. What we ended up doing is splitting up, putting the ambulance on one of the vehicles that was in the middle of the road, and then myself and the backstep fireman, Dave Perry, we went to the vehicle that she was in and checked on her. Initially, she was unresponsive. She came around when I talked to her, and we let her know we're going to get her out as quick as we can.
And was she stuck? Was she trapped in the car?
Yeah, she was pinned in the vehicle.
How do you get someone out when they're pinned in a vehicle?
We carry extrication equipment, Hurst Jaws of Life, AMCUS extrication equipment, depending on which unit we're on. But we have hydraulic rescue tools that will use hydraulic force to sever the metal components or just pry them off.
And that's what they had to do to get you out. Yes. And I know we have some pictures of you, I guess, in those few days after that extrication and your arrival at the hospital. And the description, were you aware of what had happened to your body when the whole thing did take place?
Not at all. Not at all. Like I said, the accident happened on Tuesday. I woke up Saturday night and had no idea where I was or what was going on. I looked up and I saw my 3 kids who all live in the Midwest, and I'm like, something's not good if all the kids are here. But yeah, I have no memory of any of that.
Right. And what was the first thing that anyone said to you other than, "Are you awake?"
Gosh, I really don't know. I'm told that I tried to respond, but I had all kinds of respiratory equipment on me and was fighting that. I didn't feel very good. So, but I don't know, to tell you the truth.
Had you ever thought you were going to be in an accident like that?
Never.
Never could have imagined it.
Mm-mm.
And you spent a fair amount of time recovering from that.
I did. I was in the hospital for 4 weeks to begin with. Then I was released to a rehab nursing home to learn how to maneuver a little bit. I was there for 2 weeks, developed a MRSA infection, and was back in the hospital for another 4 weeks. And the result of that was they ended up having to take another 3 inches. I had an amputation. He took another 3 inches off my leg just to get ahead of the infection because it was a lethal one.
So the MRSA came probably from being in the hospital and having all the surgical episodes that were going on as it was. So, and from what I've heard the description, and it sounds fairly drastic,
Yeah.
but you've recovered.
Yes.
And I'm going to hear some more about that as well. Now, you had an episode.
I did, yes.
And I don't think that we have any pictures, but you can give us a picture as to what happened to you.
I can. I remember it fairly well. I was a passenger in a Ford F-150 pickup truck that was headed south on 95. I had fallen asleep, and then the driver fell asleep, and we hit a guardrail head-on at what was estimated in the police report to be like 45 miles an hour. We hit with the bias on my side of the truck, so the whole front of the truck kind of came in around me. The glove compartment was up around my head. The roof bent, which bent the back window into my seat, so I sort of ended up smushed between the seat and the glove compartment.
Were you conscious through any of that?
The last thing I remember is seeing the yellow and the black on the guardrail right before we hit it, and then I was unconscious for, I'm guessing, just a little bit, because when I came to, I didn't really know what had happened, but I knew I was really uncomfortable, and I figured I needed to get out of the truck, so I tried to get myself out of the truck, and I went to unbuckle my seatbelt and realized I couldn't move. And at that point, I don't really know where rescue was. They weren't actually helping me at that point, but I heard activity behind me, so I just screamed, "Get me out of here." Because I'm told when rescue got there, they thought I was dead, and I guess went to attend to the driver because he was in the middle of the highway.
So you got to meet Jaws as they extricated you as well?
I did. It took about 40 minutes for them to get me out, and I didn't lose consciousness again, so I remember the whole rescue in pretty good detail.
And did they take you by helicopter to the hospital?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also to Fairfax.
And were you conscious there when you arrived and conversant?
Yep.
So in terms of your brain and your consciousness, you had survived that without incurring too much damage there, but you did injure your nervous system.
I did. I broke my back in 4 places.
In 4 places.
Yeah.
So you got to meet Dr. Rizzo, or...
I wasn't lucky enough to have Dr. Rizzo.
Yeah.
She wasn't working there yet, but many of her colleagues were there, yeah, helping me out.
And you were in the hospital for
I spent a week in the hospital, but they put me in a cast that went from about here to my knee, so I had to spend the next about 2 months in a hospital bed. My parents rented one, and I just sort of laid in the living room for 2 months.
Wow, so you were lucky. When trauma surgeons take care of patients in the hospital, what happens? I mean, you encounter them in the emergency room, and then you do your procedures. They're a special category of surgery. You have to be pretty much ready to tackle anything that comes in the door.
Exactly. We're kind of the Renaissance people of surgery. People also always confuse us with emergency room doctors because we generally admit our patients out of the emergency room, and we spend a lot of time down there. But we're actual surgeons. And so depending on what the patient needs, if they don't need immediate surgery and they need to get some fluids or some blood or some procedures, we take them to the trauma intensive care unit where we can perform those things. If they need immediate surgery, being a trauma center, we always have an operating room on standby. We take them directly to the operating room to perform whatever operative procedures they need. We then care for them in the ICU, the intensive care unit. We also have a step-down unit, an intermediate care unit for patients that are not quite sick enough to be in the ICU, but not well enough to be on the floor. We then care for them as well on the floor with their needs, planning for rehabilitation like we heard about, and physical therapy, occupational therapy. And then we discharge them either to rehabilitation or to home many times. And then we see them back in the clinic. So it's a very comprehensive care, right from the beginning all the way till they come back with their grandchildren.
Right. Well, that's great. So it really is a discipline in and of itself. I know that neurosurgery is never an easy thing to get covered in a hospital. You have a very good neurosurgical team that works with the trauma center, which is ultimately, I guess, one of the most important things. I'm curious, when you encounter someone with that kind of injury, obviously your greatest concern is not to do something that disrupts, I guess, their spinal cord, for instance, if there's some suspicion. I mean, most of them must be at great risk for fractures and potential complications of just being moved.
Absolutely. Generally, by the time we're on scene, the fire department who has extricated the patient has what we call packaged the patient and secured C-spine and secured them to a long backboard. And then when we take care from them, those precautions are carried with us and making sure that we do not harm what could be a potentially very serious injury.
So in the helicopter, you more or less have like an emergency room on board with IV fluids and medications, intubation apparatus, and some of the surgical things you might need if there is an emergent issue that needs some kind of response.
Absolutely. We carry basically what an ambulance or a medic unit has on board, but on a little bit of a smaller scale. Everything's very readily available to the order vent if a patient is intubated, to the your monitors and all other little surgical kits that you might carry, to include surgical cric kits, which we use as a very last resort.
Right. And I think that everybody always fears, I mean, most of the time you're probably going to be responding to some of the more serious accidents in inclement weather. And riding in a helicopter, a medical helicopter, must be pretty nerve-wracking, I would think, especially when you hear about some of the traumas that happen to those teams as they try to respond in weather that might not be the safest to fly in.
And there are set standards, and unfortunately, sometimes the weather does not allow us to fly, and it's up to the ground units then to transport them to the Level 1 Trauma Center, and could take a lot longer then, but we can't risk the lives of the crew members as well.
And I guess with the traffic the way it is here in Northern Virginia, we're hoping that weather doesn't ever prohibit anything like that from happening. Now, I know you've had an episode or two through all of this as well.
Yes.
Give us a little perspective as to what happened for you.
For me personally, in February of 1998, I was involved in a crash, a rather serious crash that happened close to my home. I'd left my home to return a video to a Blockbuster store just a few miles away, and a drunk driver lost control of his car and he hit my car head on. I was also taken to the INOVA Hospital Trauma Center and treated there. taken into their intensive care unit after surgery, and spent 4 days in the intensive care unit. I was then transferred to the orthopedic floor, and 10 days there, more surgeries, and then I spent 1 more month in a rehab hospital in Reston.
And you're her daughter.
Yes, I am.
How old were you when this all took place?
I was 7 years old.
7. You probably have been the one who'd been watching the video. No,
Perhaps,
maybe
I
not.
don't
Perhaps.
remember. Maybe.
And fortunately, you weren't with her when she went to take it back.
I was asleep. It was late at night, so I was
Yes.
asleep.
And that's a good thing. But what happened? I mean, were you awoken? Did you find out? How did someone tell you that something had happened?
The next morning, my dad came in, and he woke me up, and he carried me from my bedroom through the living room into the kitchen. And I remember seeing my mom's close friend sitting on the couch, and I was kind of confused as to why she was there. And my dad sits me down in the kitchen, and has his back to me, and he says, "Mom was in a really bad car crash. She's in the hospital. What do you want for breakfast?" And so
He tried to slide something by you there, huh?
And so everything stayed the same. I still went to school. I was in Girl Scouts, took piano, took ballet, was in T-ball. We still did all that.
And then you'd go visit Mom
We did whenever we could.
whenever you could.
Yeah.
And what was it like when you first walked in there? Was she able to smile and say hello, or was she instrumentated with, all the things that might be used in a traumatic hospital room?
We didn't go in the first week or first couple of days whenever she was in the ICU.
Right.
My dad made the decision not to have my brother and I go in to see her like that. And I remember standing outside. My dad was kneeling next to us and said, she has like a patch over her eye, I think it's still at that point, from something. And he did explain briefly what her injuries were and what it would be like. And then we just went in, talked to her. We'd read stories together.
So you tried to make it normal.
Yeah.
And I guess at 7, normal meant that Mom loved you still.
Right.
And
As always.
and it really didn't matter. Nothing else mattered
Right.
at that moment. What were you thinking through all that?
Well, I don't have a lot of memories of the first few days, so I feel that the intensive care staff did their job very well. I don't remember the first few visits from my children. I have a lot of photographs that were taken, so when I look at the photos, I can sort of piece things together. But once I became aware of what had happened, it seemed very surreal. It wasn't anything that I ever expected that would happen to me. I had been a member of Mothers Against Drunk Driving since the early 80s. Never really expected that I would be affected. It was always something else that you read about in the paper. And I wasn't fully aware of my injuries, I don't think, for the first maybe week. I knew that they were broken legs, I knew that there were internal injuries, but to finally have the full impact set in, I don't think it took for maybe a week until I could fully realize what had happened.
And that's a pretty traumatic moment for someone.
Yes.
I guess, people have things happen all the time. You see athletes who plan their whole lives to be a professional athlete, and in an early stage of their career end up with some career-ending injury. And I mean, was it one of those sort of self-realizations that you'll never be the same when that happened?
Yes, and that's the short answer. I think physically I have recovered very well. I had rather serious injuries, but I am able to walk again. I have some limitations, but not very many. But I think it's the emotional impact. I don't think we ever truly get over the emotional trauma. Some people handle it in different ways, of course, but I think it's always with us to a certain degree. I actually had a little bit of guilt for leaving my children, and that's something that I don't think about as much anymore, but I felt very badly about being away from them.
Well, we all feel like if there was always something a little bit different, that might not have happened. Now, you have another exceptional situation. I mean, not only has one parent had a traumatic injury, but your husband as well.
Yes. Yes. Back in 1991, in the spring of 1991, we were visiting family in Pennsylvania. We had taken 2 cars for various reasons. But my husband, Bob, was traveling south on Interstate 270, and he had our 10-year-old son and our 3-year-old son in the car with him. Amanda and I, you were 3 months old at the time, we were in a car traveling about a half hour behind them. close to, I guess between Frederick, or headed toward the Frederick area, a woman traveling north on 270 crossed through the median and struck them head on. The two boys were taken to Children's Hospital by helicopter, and Bob was taken to the suburban hospital in Maryland. And yeah, it's hard to believe that we can have two separate severe crashes. I don't know how often that happens
And
typically.
how were you notified in that situation?
Oh, well, as I said, we were traveling about a half hour behind them, and I encountered the traffic jam, which
Wow.
is not that rare on 270 sometimes.
Right, sure.
But for a split second, I had this fear of my family, but I just put it out of my head immediately. I took another route home, and when I got to my house, my husband's ex-wife was there. And apparently, family members had been notified, but they weren't able to reach me because we had no cell phone at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't until I got all the way home with baby Amanda that I had to then have friends take me into Children's Hospital first. I had to decide, who do I go to?
Right.
My husband, my children. So,
Everybody came through okay.
yes,
Well, that's
yes.
a blessing. It's very incredible. At the same time, when you went through all that, somehow you had to deal with continuing to drive.
Mm-hmm.
Do you drive?
Yes, I do.
Did you have a lot of concern about her getting a license
Oh,
and
my,
getting
yes.
out on the road?
Oh, yes.
I bet you did.
Oh, yes. Well, her older brother, who is now 20, of course, had his driver's license first. And I remember standing in the driveway, and, of course, we took the pictures. And as he drove away, I just felt faint. I don't think I can handle this. I just don't know if I can watch them start to drive. But I didn't have as much concern about her because I knew she was very responsible, very cautious. And I was still worried, of course, about the other drivers. But I just felt that she was so ready and so mature for her age that we stood in the driveway, we took the proverbial pictures, and when she drove away, I didn't feel faint, I just cried. Because that was my baby driving away that
Right,
time.
yeah.
But there was an element of concern with both kids.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you don't hear by midnight or whatever time it is that you've
Mm-hmm.
arranged to have that communication. I guess cell phones help a lot.
Yes, they do.
But then again, cell phones seem to also be sort of a burden to society in some ways. How many people die on the highways a year?
Thousands. And we actually give a program to the high school students in the area called Reality Check. And talking on the cell phone is the number 2 reason why people under the age of 20 get in car crashes. And the number 1 cause of death in people under the age of 40, you know, from babies to 40, is car crashes. And that's a huge impact on the nation, losing a portion of society that can cause regeneration of the society on the highways.
An incredible study that I read in sort of doing some background on the show was one that was done, I think, in Blacksburg, actually, at Virginia Tech or one of those areas down there. And they basically put sensors and video cameras in cars. They picked 100 cars and they had them drive some incredible number of miles, 200, 300,000 miles. And 80% of those crashes occurred with a 3-second inattentive period prior to that. And most of them were stupid things. Looking at your cell phone, bending down to pick up something that fell on the floor. Occasionally it was, you know, other kinds of things. They really didn't categorize them all. But it wasn't all evil things that might come to your mind when you think about people getting distracted. And that 63% of the ones that were near crashes that didn't quite make it were the same sort of thing. But it's just 3 seconds of inattention. It's a pretty remarkable thing. The other kinds of injuries, obviously we're talking primarily about motor vehicle accidents, as they call them, VAs. But you see a lot of other types of injuries in the hospital there. I think falls are probably even more significant relative to productive society.
Well, with the aging of our population, falls are becoming a significant issue. As when elderly people fall, they have a higher chance of getting a brain injury. And on the blood thinners and all the medicines that we're using now for heart disease and vascular disease, it increases their chance of bleeding. So falls are a big one. And actually in Fairfax County, over the last several years, we're seeing a higher incidence of penetrating trauma as well. with gang violence and gun violence in the area. Much higher incidence than used to be in the past. We still have an overwhelming blunt injury with falls and other kinds of injuries, but the penetrating injury has also increased significantly in the last 5 years.
Yeah. Alcohol often involved in those as well?
Alcohol as well as other substances, yes. There's many studies out there that show your increased risk of dying or being injured if alcohol is involved. And we have several patients that we know of in our database that we have taken care of in one crash only to kill themselves in another crash or another incident involving alcohol and or drugs.
Yeah, so recidivism is pretty big.
Very high,
Yeah.
very high.
Sometimes you're just a victim of the moment, and I know that that you had an episode that we need to hear about too.
Yeah, just a weird circumstance, not weird at all. March 26, 2001, middle of the afternoon, I was just going to an appointment, and I was broadsided by a dump truck who had run a red light. And I remember nothing.
You remember nothing?
Nothing.
Until?
Probably 2+ weeks later.
2+ weeks later. And where were you when you came to?
I was at home, and like little snippets here and there, you know, I recognize my husband and recognize my house and stuff like that, but I can't tell you, it came gradually. I can't tell you conversations, I can't tell you the day or anything like that.
Okay, well, let's take a step back. So you were in an accident, you don't have any recollection, but you've heard. Well, why don't you tell us what you know about it?
Well,
you weren't in the car, obviously.
No, I was at work. Actually, there's some guilt there because I was out having a good time with my coworkers at lunch. I got back to the office and somebody from the reception desk paged me and told me that my wife was in an accident in the hospital. I immediately called a friend of mine who had kids in the same grade as my kids and said, Eileen's been in an accident. I need you to take care of the kids. She took care of them, got them out of school. I immediately went to the hospital, and because she had been hit by a drunk driver when she was 16, I expected the worst. I thought that she was going to have all these horrendous injuries. And when I rounded the corner into the room, she was laying there. She had a cut on her ear. She had some other cuts on her face, but she looked remarkably well. And so I was talking to her like normal, but I soon found out that she had no idea where she was or what she was doing. She kept asking me questions. She kept asking me the same question. She was talking about her cousin, somebody she had talked to a couple days before. She was just out of it, totally out of it.
So she wasn't in pain? It didn't, or not excruciating pain?
Not excruciating pain, no.
And she didn't look like she had been injured, but she really had been injured. Yeah. And how old were you at the time?
I was 9.
You were
I was
9.
in 3rd grade.
Yes. And you heard about it after school that day, or?
I did not hear about it until 7 o'clock that evening. And I actually heard about it through a friend. I didn't, like, my dad didn't get a chance to tell me or anything. So I just thought I was spending the night on a random weekday at a friend's house, so.
Well, and it's hard to figure out what to do in those situations. Yeah. So you had a brain injury.
Yeah, a traumatic brain injury.
And one that probably is not an uncommon finding, one that Dr. Rizzo was more or less just talking about, that a lot of people have injuries that way. You weren't on any medicines that predisposed you to an unusual kind of injury.
No, and I broke nothing.
Right.
The whole impact was in my head. He nailed me good.
So, and the car looked like it, I bet.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing how you can walk out of those. And literally, you probably could have walked out of that.
They said no.
No? Okay.
I was.
They wouldn't let you,
well,
anyway.
What I was reading later was that I was resuscitated at the scene. So, and I was airlifted.
Wow. Okay. So they watched you in the hospital for a while, and they gave you some services, but basically they said you're going to have to go home and recover?
Yeah.
And did you do that continuously at home?
Yes. I was pretty much a zombie.
A little vegetable.
A little bit of a vegetable.
A little bit of a vegetable.
Okay.
I would get her up in the morning. I brought a recliner up from the downstairs and let her sit in the chair. I would come home, check on her at lunch. She'd still be in the same chair, just watching TV, not really knowing what she was doing. I tried to get people to come over that knew us, spend a little time with her at lunch. But like she said, there was a 2.5 week period or so that she doesn't recall anything.
Wow.
So,
How long did it take you to sort of come to your senses, I guess you could say?
Well, I did, like I said, gradually after a few weeks and things like that, I knew what was going on, and I also knew things were not right. And I went to physical therapy, I went to speech therapy, but the brain, the forgetfulness, the running joke was he would say, "Why didn't you say so-and-so called?" I was like, "I don't remember." And that's when I had to learn how, with speech therapy, I had to learn to write things down, to process them, because otherwise they were gone. So it was all a learning process.
Mm-hmm. And did you feel odd about it as you were going through it? I mean, were you aware of the fact that you couldn't remember things? Did it start to get to you?
Yes. And the worst part was I remembered who I was before, and that's very aggravating when you're not that person anymore.
Right. Pretty incredible. Traumatic brain injuries. We need to hear from you a little bit, Christine. I know that you're involved with INOVA.
Yes. Daniel and I both run the Rebuild program at INOVA Fairfax Hospital, which involves 5 different types of support groups for survivors of traumatic injuries. And one of our support groups is specifically for folks who've survived a traumatic brain injury.
Traumatic brain injuries, can you give us a little more perspective as to how lay people would understand them better?
Traumatic brain injury, the folks that we end up having a chance to come to our group, like Eileen, you heard Eileen's story.
Right.
Some folks suffer such horrendous brain injuries, and it becomes obvious. They have really marked deficits. And there are others like Eileen, or a lot of folks that are classified as the mild traumatic brain injury, or even just a concussion that may even be discharged from the emergency room, that get home and find out that they are having some real problems, not able to do the simplest of tasks, getting lost in their car in neighborhoods that they've driven for 20 years. These minor things that are second nature to you and me, but all of a sudden their brain is not working the way that it used to. And those folks begin then to find either like Eileen, for a period of time end up isolating themselves because it's too scary to venture out into the world, because you don't know what's going to happen to you, and it's so frustrating. And then some of those people find their ways to us with the Rebuild program, to one of these support groups, and to have a chance to spend some time talking to other people and understanding that they are not so alone, that there are a lot of other people that have struggled with this and how they have made it through this period.
And I guess it can be pretty depressing at the same time, especially if you're prone to it in the first place or whatever, but you isolate yourself, you don't find joy, you're afraid of interacting socially.
Absolutely.
And embarrassment. Because they know they're not the same as they were before, and they'll run into someone at the grocery store that they know they should know that person, but by golly, they have no idea from where, what her name is. And it's scary, it's disorienting, and it's embarrassing.
Right. One of the other issues that sort of comes out here is that people experience an acute stress episode, coming through something like this and then having to face the reality of what happened and what their bodies and minds might have to deal with coming out of it. I guess you could call that an acute stress reaction.
Certainly. Other things we have folks tell us about it in terms of acute stress reactions, nightmares, flashbacks to the car crash that might just kind of flash out of nowhere, or just the scent of something maybe reminds them of being in the hospital and what that was like.
And then a post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, that's something that comes a little bit later, something that seems to persevere for a longer time.
It's diagnosable later if the post-traumatic stress doesn't resolve itself within a certain period of time.
So, and we heard a lot about that. It became something more recognizable when, I guess, 9/11 occurred, and people would have that acute stress reaction where they had an incredible, let's say, emotional outpouring. Initially, they had a lot of fear from day to day, but then there were those who weeks, months later kept having flashbacks, reliving episodes, becoming paralyzed, fearing everything would go wrong. And And fear is something that all of us as parents can experience. I know that you've had an episode in your life that really changed your world.
I have. On Memorial Day 1999, my son, 18 years old, Matt, was killed by a drunk driver. He was a passenger in a car driven by his friend.
And he was, he was in college at the time?
He was 18. He was still in high school, and the driver had already graduated. Mm-hmm. They were leaving an underage field party, and we had asked that Matt come home about 1 o'clock, and his girlfriend had taken him to the party because Matt didn't drive and had just chosen not to. We made him buy his grandma's car, and he still wouldn't drive. So his friends were always accommodating, and he didn't want his girlfriend to have to leave the party, so he went with some other people. And the party was about a mile from our house and about 4 blocks from our house. The driver lost control, estimated speed 89 miles an hour in a single car crash, hit the right guardrail, overcorrected, hit the left guardrail. Matt and the driver were ejected because they were not wearing seat belts. 2 other passengers were trapped, and Matt flew through the sky and landed on the eastbound lanes of the street in front of our neighborhood.
A hard tale to tell.
It is.
It is. And I'm sure it took a long time for you to come to reconcile anything positive about what you experienced and how it's inspired you in other ways.
Well, the positive is that I have to stop other families from being in the same position that I'm in. Memorial Day 1999, my life changed. And if I can do anything to stop other families from knowing this pain, then I will go do. And I speak at many, many events. And, you know, Matt's death has to mean something. It has to help someone else.
I'm glad you can bring that to help other people.
Thank you.
And I know that you're involved with an organization, and we have a representative from that organization. MAD. A good name for an organization like that, because I bet she's pretty mad.
I'm sure, yes. And we're not just mothers anymore. That's how it was formed, but we are fathers, brothers, sisters, grandparents, children as well. But MAD has such a powerful name to it that we stick with.
Right, Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
Mm-hmm.
When was it started? How long ago?
It was formed in 1980 as a national organization, and in Northern Virginia, we've had a chapter here since 1982.
And obviously you go out, you do public outreach.
We do advocacy. We have tons of volunteers who go out in the community talking to youth, talking to adults, talking to DUI offenders about how drunk driving has changed their life forever. And we do a lot of underage drinking prevention as well, and provide victim services.
Any statistics on alcohol and car accidents?
In 2007, nationally, there were 12,998 drunk driving deaths. And that was actually, nationally, it was a 3.7% decline, which is the first dip in about 5 years. We had been plateaued. The downside is that Virginia, unfortunately, did not do very well. And we increased in the state of Virginia by 11%.
Well, there are so many issues there to talk about from the point of view of just caring about our kids. I think that kids have a much greater awareness that someone has to be sober, and that regardless of where they go, they need to have someone who they can rely on to drive them. And of course, we have to have parents who are willing to say, I don't care what state you're in, call me, I'll come get you. It is amazing, and the fatality rate with drunk driving is quite a bit higher than it is in the non-drunk type accidents.
Yes,
as well.
That's true. When there is an accident, if alcohol is involved, it's much more likely to be deadly.
Yeah. Alcohol. I mean, it seems to be such a ubiquitous problem, in particular when it comes to trauma and what you see there. you guys do a lot of outreach through the hospital and through the trauma center.
The American College of Surgeons now actually requires to get your trauma center designation, you must have an alcohol investigation program. And what that involves is questioning patients about their alcohol use and then offering rehabilitative services to those patients and education about why drinking or taking your Percocet and painkillers and driving your vehicle is a bad idea, and how we can get you into a program to help you with these addictions if you have these problems. So we actually have a program in place at Fairfax Hospital to do that, to intervene with the patients while they're in the hospital, as well as educate them.
Right. Are there services available? I know that on specific holidays there are, but are there services available for people to call if, in fact, they've drunk too much and they have a car and they don't want to drive home?
Not through INOVA Fairfax Hospital, but there are some through the community. Right. And it just depends in which area that you live. They're usually staffed by volunteers, and they try to get the numbers out in advance of the holidays or the special events to help people such as that, or simply call a cab. They also give out cab vouchers for things like this.
So Amanda, you're in high school. Is it a big problem? Are there a lot of kids who are drinking in school?
It's not just alcohol, but yes, there's a lot of alcohol, a lot of marijuana in high school, yes.
Yeah. Is there been any evolution in the way people address it relative to understanding that they are at risk if they're driving?
There's basic information that they give us in health class. It's not really touched upon nearly enough as it should be.
So there's an opportunity out there for people to learn a lot more. Yeah, I noticed this over here, and digressing off of that topic for a little bit. This is something that you got while you were in the hospital?
Yes, this is something that I refer to as my happy box, and I think that it was my children who originally named this for me. Since I was in the hospital for such a long time, I had a lot of caring friends who sent me cards and flowers, and also some of Amanda's friends in her first grade class made me a lot of artwork, and they sent them in to me. I kept every single thing. It started out with just a pile of cards sitting on my bedside table, and the nurses got tired of picking them up off the floor, so they brought this box from somewhere, and little by little the box began to get filled up, and I kept everything, and that is what helped to get me through those 2 months or so that I was in the hospital.
Yeah, it was a long time, and you've done a remarkable job coming through it. I want to hear a little bit more about how you overcame what you said. You lost a leg. Hard thing to deal with. I mean, that's a very... I mean, it's one of those things. You see soldiers coming back from Iraq, and you just can't believe the numbers of them losing limbs. Right. And you have a perspective on what happens. It had to be very emotionally traumatic to go through that period of awareness first. Sort of a loss, almost like losing a friend, losing a spouse, losing a loved one.
Absolutely. It was something that I had to grieve. I mean, I lost a lot of different things as a result of the accident. The leg was a big part of it. And I was given the option for reconstructive surgery, many of them, but with no guarantee that anything would come of it. And Dr. Himes, my trauma surgeon, orthopedic surgeon, recommended the amputation. And I was like, oh, you got to have a better answer than that. And he suggested getting a second opinion. So I said, yeah, great idea. So we hooked up with another orthopedic surgeon who looked at my films, and he told me just about the very same thing that Dr. Himes did. And, I thought about it. I bet it was well over 2 weeks before I really made the decision. Of course, the first week I lost, but... Dr. Himes said, and I had some social workers come see me, and they all said the same thing. Go ahead with the amputation. It's going to heal quicker. You'll get fitted with a prosthesis, and you'll have your life back much sooner and on a much higher level than going in and out of the hospital all the time with these hopefully successful surgeries. But so I said, okay.
You went through it.
And we did.
Yeah. How long did it take you to get to the point where you could drive again?
Oh, wow. I didn't get my prosthesis until right before Christmas that year. So I was in a wheelchair, all of that, and ended up, I actually got MRSA in my left foot and had to deal with that several times. But then in January, I went to Mount Vernon Rehab to learn to walk with a walker and the prosthesis. I didn't get back behind the wheel until, actually, it was about 1 year to the day.
1 year.
Yeah. And I had to go to Winchester Rehab to be certified to drive and then have some adaptive apparatus put in my car. Mm-hmm. And then get behind the wheel.
Yeah, I would imagine. And how long before you could go on the Beltway?
I avoid that a lot.
Yeah,
and
I can imagine.
But you know what? Evergreen Mill Road is the road I had my accident on. And I went on that road several times as a passenger post-accident. That was scary. But the really scary part was driving it alone by myself. But I knew I needed to do that to overcome the fear and check that box off. And it was immensely scary. I drove it going one way and then the way that I had been driving when I had the event. Not one right after the other, but it's like, yay, I did that. I never have to do that again. And it was a real sense of personal victory to be able to do that.
You get to drive her sometimes.
I have, yes.
Does it make you nervous?
No.
No?
No.
You're pretty confident. You're pretty comfortable. You're comfortable with his driving.
He told me on our very first ride, I don't even know where we went, but he said, my job is to be extra special careful with you. And I remember we were on Route 7 going somewhere, pick up his wife and go to an event. And there was a car accident on Route 7 westbound. We were going eastbound, and he tried to keep me talking so I wouldn't notice it. And I noticed it, and it was the first car crash I'd seen after my own. And he said, that's got to be really hard for you, isn't it? And I said, yeah, and I lost it because I knew what those people were going through.
And how long did it take you to get to drive again?
I wasn't physically able to drive for about 3 months.
Right.
And I did okay driving. I had a really hard time driving by car crashes. I freaked out and would cry for hours on end. But my biggest issue is driving with someone else in my car. I could not do that, and that took years. I mean, now I have a 5-year-old child, so I don't have a choice, but it took years for me to be able to drive with someone else in my car because I did not want that responsibility. I didn't want to be responsible for that person's life.
And you basically had to deal with that kind of anger. Did you have anger for being a passenger in that situation?
Yeah, I had a lot of anger. Took years to get over that, too. Yeah, I was very angry, and I was angry not just at the driver, though, but a lot at myself. Because I felt like at that night, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to ride from him. I wanted to go home. Right. I didn't want to go out again. And I was really angry at myself for getting in that situation. So it wasn't all directed at him. A lot of it was directed at me.
So it's that spinner. It just seems to spin and where it lands. Sometimes it doesn't really matter how you change things. It's just happened. Your little boy is 5 years old. And I guess you've been pretty careful with him in the car.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we see many kids in the MBAs in terms of unrestrained?
Yes, and that is a law in the state of Virginia and in most states that kids under 80 pounds need to be restrained either in car seats or booster seats. And I've seen a kid in a folding chair put between two seats in a van. I mean, it's just amazing what people will do. And it's against the law. And they get tickets, but kids get hurt. In being a trauma center, a pediatric trauma center as well as an adult trauma center, we take care of all those kids as well.
Yeah, and in fact, I guess now it's infant seats that are rear-facing. In the rear seat, to age 1 and or at least 20 pounds.
Correct. And that may even be changing because some of the data coming out of the National Transportation Safety Board is showing that the rear-facing seats are actually much safer.
Right.
And so that may be changing soon.
So they'll be going even
Longer.
And that really kids need to be in the car seats to the mid-50s or 60-pound range.
Correct.
And then on a booster seat.
On a booster seat
right.
till 80.
Right. Kids generally, you think of them as more resilient, but they get splashed around in a car. I think of the Geico commercial with the sumo wrestler.
Exactly. And especially the brain injuries are much more devastating in children because you don't really know what they lost because it's much harder to tell. They've been more publicized with the Iraq and Afghanistan and in Iraq, but it's a serious issue not only in children but in adults. Very costly to society.
Well, I do want to thank you in particular for coming because I know that we rely on you and your services to be out there for us at all times. And I know that it's an interesting, I guess, career path for people. You found it rewarding.
Absolutely.
I thank you, and I'm sure that Connie thanks you for being there. And I thank all of you for sharing your stories with us. They're remarkable, they're touching, they're incredible. And Dr. Rizzo, I thank you, of course, for imparting all your experience and knowledge about what goes on in the Trauma Center. And we all have to be very grateful that we are here in a place where we have those kinds of services. We have support services. We have MAD, people who are looking out for us and educating our youth to try to decrease the frequency of unnecessary and really horrific trauma. So you know where you can go to help if you want to participate in INOVA, MAD. You can find their websites, and you know you can find me here at the station. And I thank you for watching, and until the next time, I'm Dr. Russell Libby, looking out for your health.